Nobody tell Carrie Ann that I might contradict the children's message a little bit. That'll just get me in trouble later. And what I mean by that is today, obviously, we're talking about the spiritual gift of generosity, and certainly there are many ways in which in life we can be generous and are called to be generous. Most of those ways that we are called to do that, Paul would actually slot under the service category. When Paul talks about generosity, he is actually fairly clearly, based on this and other writings, talking about money. So today we're going to talk about money. Which is something we do actually talk about in the church, and we talk about it because Jesus talked about it. In fact, the topic that Jesus talks about the most in the gospel is money. And we might find that to be interesting because the way that the church is typically stereotyped about the things that we actually supposedly care about or make a big deal about, it seems to be anything but. But Jesus had a lot of concern about money and its relation and people's relationship to it. However, Jesus never said that money itself was inherently bad. The money wasn't the problem. John Wesley, founder of Methodism, who obviously we're using a lot in this series because I like John and I like his style, talked about money a lot as well. And he wrote a sermon on money, and that's what we're going to actually use for most of our time today, is this amazing sermon that he wrote on money. And in that he says, money is an excellent gift of God, answering the noblest ends. In the hands of his children, it is food for the hungry, drink for the thirsty, remnant for the naked. It gives to the traveler and the stranger where to lay his head. And then he goes on about all the amazing and wonderful things we can do with money. So I guess I'm actually not stepping on the children's message. Whew! That may be an awkward conversation on Monday. All right. He goes on in the same sermon to say that the love of money is the root of evil, not the thing itself. So the problem isn't the money, the problem is our relationship to it, as is often the case. And then, John being John, and John being this thing that I love so much, he goes and prepares and offers up some very basic rules for how it is that he thinks we ought to relate to money. And he lays it out very succinctly. He says, first and foremost, earn all you can. He had no problem with people earning money, in fact, expected them to, and thought one of the benefits of living a more disciplined life that Methodism calls you to do was the chances were you were going to earn more. So he had no problem with that. And then finally he said, save all you can, but he didn't mean that the way that we think about it. We're going to come back to the at the end, or in a minute. And then finally he said, give all you can. Earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can, was what he wanted us to do. So earning money and wanting to earn money is not a bad thing, right? And I think sometimes we get in our heads a little messed up about this understanding of what it is that we are supposed to do, right? Earning money itself and wanting to earn money itself is not a bad thing. That's not where the problem lies. And as I was thinking about this, I was recalling a time right before we actually moved here. So before we moved here, as most of you know, we lived in Billings, Montana, and we actually lived on a very busy street. It was actually not only a busy street, it was the main way that the ambulances went from the ambulance, house thing that they lived in. I don't know what that's called. Up to the north part of town. So it was often for 3 o'clock in the morning, we would, when the bars let out. Let me just say that. Because the ambulances were running. But it was a very busy street and, fairly major street, but we had nice parking. And sometime that spring, after we learned we were going to be leaving, my daughter came to me and she's like, Dad, it's like, we have to build a lemonade stand. I'm like, okay. And he's like, and I'm like, we have to do it because we live on a busy street right now, but we're not going to live on a busy street right now. And if I'm ever going to have a lemonade stand, we have to do it now. And I'm like, well, what would childhood be like without a lemonade stand? And so I said, fine, but you have to help. And so for the next couple of days, this was the summer, next couple of days, we spent in the shop finding all the scrap wood we could find and, all of that and cutting out that little sign, which I think we still have somewhere. I think it's in her room. And she painted it and decorated it. And then we got all the supplies to buy lemonade and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, it was a fun little project. We'll see how this goes. And I'm like, why do you want to do this? And she's like, well, I want to do it to make money. I'm like, well, what are you going to do with the money? I'm like, I don't know. but I just want to make some money. I'm like, okay. So Vivian went out there, and I thought, she's young at this time. I mean, I think she was like I don't know, was it just before first grade? I'm trying to remember when this was, first and second, somewhere in there. And I'm like, and it was a hot day, so we had to go get the little umbrella thing for her. And I'm like, she's going to last about an hour, right? She's going to be out there, and that's about as long as she's going to go. And so she's sitting there, and not an hour goes by, and then a couple hours go by, and 3 hours go by, and I haven't seen her. And I'm like, what's going on? And so I go out there, and sure enough, not only is she sitting there, selling her wares, and she actually has a customer when I go out, she's got the neighbor boy behind her sitting next to her. And I'm like, what's up? And she's like, oh, I needed help, so I hired him. And I'm like, okay. And I look at her little cash box, and she's doing pretty well. And I'm like, okay, we probably need to put some of this somewhere else, right? So we're like, okay, we put it in here and, all that kind of stuff. Jim, she needed you, and you weren't around, sorry. And so it keeps going. And they lasted out there until like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And then the next day, went back and did it again. And what was really funny, what I really enjoyed, was watching not just them, but watching the customers that stopped by. Because ostensibly, what she was doing is she was selling lemonade, which is fine, and it's little kid lemonade, so it's not great, but it's something. But to a person, I would say 90% of the people who stopped to buy from her were at least or past retirement age. That's who stopped. And 2 to 1, if I was out there, they would comment, it's so nice to see somebody doing this. I'm so glad she's not inside staring at a screen. I had a lemonade stand when I was a kid, and I missed it, and I enjoyed it so much. To the point that oftentimes they would just hand her money and drive away. So truthfully, she wasn't actually selling lemonade. She was actually selling nostalgia, and she was selling the joy that these people got out of it. And for her troubles, she made a little money that I honestly couldn't even tell you what she spent on.
She bought an iPod.
She did buy an iPod, that's right. Well, that kind of ruined. Well, we'll go ahead. Fair enough. Okay. She's still a 21st century kid. What are you going to do? All right. And in many ways, Vivian embodies a lot of what John talks about in the sermon when he says, earn all you can. John says, earn all you can, absolutely. That there's no problem with that. There's no problem with wanting to earn money. There's no problem with working hard to earn money. But then he puts a giant asterisk next to it and has some caveats. He wants us to work hard, and he wants us to earn what we can, but he wants us to do it in a way that does not fundamentally harm ourselves or harm others. And he has a huge problem, with work or pursuing things that are going to do harm to us as people, to our mental health or physical health or whatever, or going to do harm to others. And he goes off on this amazing diatribe in the sermon about the gin industry. You're like, what's wrong with gin? You're asking yourself. Well, at the time Wesley lived, there weren't a lot of the other things that we would consider problematic substances that we have today. That marijuana wasn't a thing yet, cocaine wasn't a thing yet. None of those things were things yet. But people are still people, and the thing that was the thing was actually gin. And it was a huge problem in England at the time for 2 reasons. One, a lot of grain was being diverted to make gin, and that was causing the price of bread to go up, which is a big deal if 90% of your calories are from bread. And the gin was being offered at such cheap rates that it was overtaking the poor areas. And Wesley and a lot of people at the time were fairly well convinced that what was going on is that handful. Remember, England doesn't look anything like what we live in. There's a handful of people at the top and everybody else at the bottom. And what Wesley is convinced of, and a lot of people are convinced of, is that it's the people at the top propping up the gin industry, and their intention is to basically keep poor people drunk and happy with being poor. And if you think about it, this actually sort of makes some sense because they still have a king, and it's only a few years before the French Revolution, and all those sorts of things start to happen. So the nobles, the people up there, are nervous, and they're nervous on purpose, and they're nervous for good reason. And so one of the ways that they deal with it and try to deal with people is they literally flood the streets where poor people and working class people live with really, really cheap gin as a way of keeping them happy. Wesley has a problem with this. Wesley doesn't like this. And Wesley calls out specifically in his sermon those who are involved in that industry as an example of earning money at the expense of others. So he does take issue with that. So he wants us to earn, but he wants us to earn in a way that actually contributes to our lives and contributes to the lives of others. And so long as we are about that, as long as we are about to adding value to life, adding value to our communities, if we are earning money in a way that is about adding value to others and our neighbors and ourselves, then Wesley has absolutely no problem with it. And he says, do as much of it as you can, so long as you are doing no harm. So earn all you can. Then he says, save all you can. And save all you can by Wesley actually has a slightly different meaning than us. Because Wesley is also talking about a time really before like the modern stock market is invented. There are no IRAs, there are no 401ks, things like that don't exist. That's not how people save. Most people don't even have bank accounts. They're not saving there either. So when Wesley says save, he goes on and talks about it. What he's really actually talking about is what we would more associate with the idea of being like frugal or thrifty, right? He goes on to talk about earn all you can, but then don't spend your money unnecessarily and don't spend it on things you don't need to spend it on. Instead, make sure you are using your funds to enrich your life and do things that are actually going to help you along the way. So, as many of you know, I like to cook. I spend a lot of time in my kitchen. This is actually me sending up. This is actually a picture I sent to Dane, and she was like, I literally was like, "Yeah, hope you get home soon." You know, kind of. It's a hey baby picture. Hey baby, look what I did for you. Not too much, I know. All right. But I like to cook, and yeah, there's a lot. And when I was looking through my photo feed, I had to recognize that literally like a third of my pictures are of food. Because it brings me joy, and I like doing it. And I love sharing what I make with other people. It brings me joy. And I really got into this about 10 years ago. I was 10 years ago. I was looking for something to do. I had some more free time, and I realized that I wanted to get a little more intentional about learning how to cook and all that kind of stuff. And then I was looking around and going, oh my gosh, this stuff in my kitchen is not really up to the task of what it is that I want to do. So later on in the week, I was at my favorite big box store, which you all know what it is, Roy does especially, and he's laughing. And I was down the aisle, and I was looking at the cookware, and I realized my pans are old and worn out, even though they were only a few years old at that point. But they weren't great pans. They were kind of cheap. And so I'm looking at this set of pans. And they're amazing stainless steel Lumicore pans, which is what you want because the aluminum core helps distribute the heat better, but the stainless steel protects the inside and the outside and allows you to use an induction cooktop. So there you go. And so I'm looking at this set of pans, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and it's like 3 times as much as any other set of pans there, and way more than anything I've ever owned or bought. And I'm sitting there staring at it, and this very nice person just comes up next to me randomly, like sometimes people do, and she's like, are you thinking about getting those pans? I'm like, I am. I'm like, you really should. We have them. They're amazing. I'm like, I know, but they're a lot of money. She's like, yeah, but you should have them. They're amazing. And I'm like, okay, since you said it twice, could you write me a note from my wife? I need to have these. And so I brought them home. And of course, they cook a little different than nonstick pans. If you ever have problems with stainless steel, with food sticking in your stainless steel pans, you're not heating them up enough before you add your fat and food. We could do this all day too if you want. So it took a little bit of a learning curve. And I did learn that stainless steel is a bit of a misnomer. If you screw up really bad, you can stain them, as mine will show you. But here I am, 10, 12 years later, I still have that same set of pans. They're still like new. I will likely have them at least for another 10 or 12 years. The amount I would have spent replacing cheap ones would have been far more than what I spent to buy the good ones. the amount that we save by not eating out, which is getting ridiculously expensive these days if you have not done it lately, and instead eating at home. So it was an investment. That's what I told my wife then, and I'm sticking by it. But Wesley was a big fan of this. He's like, he didn't mind us spending money. He knew we had to spend money to live. What he didn't want us to do was spend it frivolously or spend it on things that didn't really matter. Wesley would have hated the fast fashion industry. He would have hated the idea that there is a whole industry set up to sell us clothes that we're apparently only supposed to wear 3 times. And that's all the longer they're going to last, so that we can just keep buying them and always be fashionable. Wesley would have taken issue with that and said that's probably not the best way to go about things. Instead, we should be very conscious of how we spend where we have to, get what we need, but then where we don't, be careful and avoid. Wesley knew if we did these 2 things, if we worked hard and diligently at something that was contributing to us and society, and we tried to earn as much as we could, we would probably be successful at that. And that if we also not only did that, but if we were also thrifty and frugal in the way that he wanted us to, and we were careful about what we spent, that the inevitable consequence of that would be that we would have at the end of the day more than we needed. And then the question becomes, then what? And that's where for John and for Jesus and everyone else who's ever talked about this, where the rubber meets the road. And if Wesley had a concern, it was that we as Methodists would fully embrace the first 2 and kind of skip the third, which is then give all you can. Now, we are called, and we definitely are in this place, a generous people. It has been proven over and over and over and over again that Christians especially, and Christians in this country, give more to charity than any other group, right? Because we know that God was generous with us, and we are called to be generous in response. Sometimes, I think we can lose faith in that. And we need to remind ourselves how good, how amazing, and how faithful we all are. One last story. So several years ago, we have done many things here with Keswa Agricultural Mission because I love them in the ministry they do, and I got to finish them years ago. Years ago, when we were first really starting that ministry again, so if you don't remember, Keswa Agricultural Ministry is a United Methodist ministry in Angola that was there throughout the Angolan Civil War and has been a key player in helping rebuild eastern Angola, which is the eastern rural, sparsely populated agricultural part of Angola, which for me as an Eastern Montanan, I have a natural kinship with, right? Like, these are my people. And we went there, and I got to travel there, and we got to see some stuff. We came back. There was a new missionary who was appointed there. His name was Ken. Some of you met him because he visited us once. And Ken was being supported, which was great. He was being supported by the denomination, which was great. The problem was he was at Keswa, which was kind of 200 acres in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was 10 miles to town, and nobody else was really close by. And Ken didn't have any way of getting around on his own. So he was having to bum rides. And so we're in a meeting about the Angola team because we're Methodists, so of course we have to have a committee. And so I'm on the committee for the Angola. See, you thought that was funny. I don't. All right. Thank you. All right. And I'm on the team, and we're talking about it. He's like, and one of the gals is like pulling her hair out. She's like, we got to figure out what to do. He needs some way to get around. And I'm like, well, why don't we buy him a truck? And she's like, oh, wow, that's going to be, and it's like $40,000. It's the weirdest thing. The poorer countries you go to, the more expensive things get, right? And so a truck that would cost $25,000 here, by the time you get it all said and done in Angola, actually costs $40,000. And it's just the way things work. And we can not like it all we want, but it just is. And so she's like, well, that costs like $40,000. I'm like, oh, $40,000, I bet we could do that. And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, what do you mean, what do I mean? Like, well, where are we going to get the money? And I'm like, we're going to ask people. You know who has the money? People. People have the money. So we asked them to give us some of theirs. She's like, well, I know, but what is that going to look like? And I'm like, are you kidding me? What? Where are we? And I'm like, we're in Montana. I'm like, where are we? Like, where are we doing ministry? Who are we doing ministry with? Right? We got a guy who needs a truck. Who knows better about people needing trucks than people from Montana? And Wyoming and Colorado, because we opened it up to everybody. She's like, you think so? And I'm like, I guarantee it. I guarantee it. Let me show you. So we actually made up these cards, and they were pretty basic. That is a picture of Ken. It says, this is Ken. This is a road in Africa. Ken needs a truck. Straightforward. There's a little bit on the other side that basically says these are the kind of things that we need a truck to do and to haul around stuff and do all these things. And that basically not having this is deeply impairing our ministry. And so we sent those postcards out to all the churches in Montana and Wyoming. And do you know what happened? People gave us money and we bought a truck much faster than anybody thought. And I remember Sally, who was running this, came into me. She's like, there was a church that I won't name that's up on the high line of Montana that's always been a little bit grumpy about everything. And she's like, I almost didn't even send them a card because they never like anything we do and they never come and they never participate. And do you know what they did? I'm like, they sent us money, didn't they? And she's like, they sent us $500 to buy this truck. And I'm like, exactly. Because it was important. Because people actually want to be generous. We want to do things that are important. We want to invest in things that matter. And for those of us who are people of faith, we want to see the work that is God's doing, and we want to be part of it, and we want to invest in it. We should not be surprised that that happened. And why should we not be surprised that that happened? Because Keswa is arguably, easily arguably, an amazing outpost for God's kingdom. That's what it does. And this whole series, we've been talking about what it is to be us and what it is to be the church, and that we are called as the church to be the outpost, be an outpost of God's kingdom. And what does an outpost of God's kingdom do? Well, in Keswa, they have a way that they do it. And they are an amazing example of what it is to be an outpost for God's kingdom. They are not the only one. In fact, there is another outpost of God's kingdom that I think is really worthwhile and that I am fond of. And that would be this place. Because as a church, our calling is no less or no more than the people out there and the people in Africa or any of those other places. We are called in the same way to be God's kingdom outpost, to be a blessing to ourselves and others, and to do what we can, like sit up here and inspire our children to bring food for the food pantry. And of course, who set up the food pantry? Because who always sets up the food pantries? Who always sets up those ministries? Who's always behind the scenes doing that work? It's the church. That has been the case for 150 years, and I don't think it's changing anytime soon. So I believe in this place. When I came here, you do an interview with the SPRC. Some of you were there. And it's how you basically, you don't get this, you basically get to say, oh God, no. Right? Like I come and I talk to you guys, Bishop says this is who I want to send, and you all guys get to sit the opportunity, that committee gets the opportunity to say, oh no, not him. That's about the level of choice that either one of us have. And I do get to say, oh, not there. Neither one of us said that, and I'm grateful for it, thank you. But one of the things I remember saying in that meeting, we were talking about things, and one of the things that we talked about was the finances of the church. And I had told him flat out, I said, here's one thing you have to understand. I have no problem asking people for money. Zero. I have zero problem asking people for money if I believe in what we're doing. And I believe in what we're doing here. So I thought I want to just bring this up a little bit. So this is our most recent financial statement. We get these every month. And the one thing I like is we have comparators to last year. So for those of you not used to reading things like this, red is not good. Generally speaking, when dealing with money, red is not the color you're going for. But as you can see, at the end of September, we are where we tend to usually be, except for 2020. 2020 was a weird year. Yeah, One of the small things, of all the weirdness in 2020, one of the small things, the weirdness of 2020, was that it was you all were exceedingly generous that year. I think you were home bored and didn't have anything else to spend your money on. However, now if you wanted any proof that the pandemic is over and we're somewhat back to normal, all you got to do is look at our finance report and go, yeah, it looks pretty normal for us in September. So we are going to have to together do the thing that we have done every fall that I've been here, except for 2020, which is we're going to have to come together and figure out how we end the year without the red. And here's the other thing. Every year that I've been here, we have finished the year in the black, and in the black by a decent amount. Why? Because what seems to happen is that when I ask or whoever asks, and when we are reminded of the importance and the power of this place, and I ask or whomever asks us to be generous in response so that we can continue to do the important work that we do here, you all have never failed to live up to that call. I brag about that all the time, by the way. Thank you. If you don't know, I brag about you all the time. In lots of ways, not just for this. John, in his letter today, writes about our need to love our neighbor and be generous with our neighbor. And if you didn't notice, he did it in very stark life and death terms. He reminded us of the life and death stakes that Jesus took on for us. He reminded us of how important it is, our faith is, and how important it is for us to be Christ's hands and feet in the world. And then the call, after reminding us to how huge the stakes were, the call was, when you have the opportunity to take care of your neighbor and be generous with your neighbor, you do it. It's actually echoing the same thing that Jesus said in the passage when we talked about service. He laid out these incredibly important life and death circumstances and then said, in response to all of this and how important it is, the most important thing is that you be kind to one another, that you be with one another. Now, we are at a time and a place in our life right now that I like the least. And the time of life that I like the least is the run-up to any national election. Because it is unavoidable that you will be bombarded with ads telling you how terrible everything is, and how awful everything is, and how the only way that it can be solved is if you vote for this person or that person. It used to be that if, I don't have cable, so that used to be enough to shield me from it, but unfortunately, political campaigns have figured out how to advertise on YouTube. And you can't skip those ads. And of course, they know where I live, so I get all the mailings like we all do. And we are told over and over and over again that the world is awful and terrible, and the only way to fix it is if you vote for me. Now, I don't do politics, right? I am already part of a struggling institution called the church that is desperately trying to find its way in the world, in a changing world, right? I don't need to deal with the struggling institution of democracy. Other people can deal with that, right? I got my thing. I'm good. But when I look at that, and we are reminded over and over again how many challenges are left in the world, I do have to acknowledge, of course, there are challenges left in the world. Of course, there are things that are not as they should be. Of course, we are still broken people living in a broken world, struggling to live better and live in the way that God called us to, and we're not done yet. Honestly, I would rather live now than in John Wesley's time. I do think things have improved dramatically. When I go to get health care, nobody puts a leech on me. That's good. So I would still rather live now than any other time open to me, and I am grateful for it, but I also know that we are not done, and my hope for my children, when they are my age, years down the road, they think, oh, it's so much better to live now than it was when poor dad was alive. Well, I guess I hope I'm not dead. That's wrong. Hold on. Wait a minute. And when I ask myself, how are we going to get there? How are we going to make things better? How are we going to help this place be a little bit more like it should be and we want it to be and how it's supposed to be and how God wants it to be? Then at the end of the day, what I'm going to invest in and what I'm going to ask people to invest in is their neighbors. I'm going to ask us to invest in people and a place that is helping people learn that they are called to love God, love their neighbor, and love themselves. Because that is not a lot of the messaging that I see in any other arena, especially the political one. Not a lot of love there. But I think the challenges that I actually deal with and what I see you all deal with, and when you come to me and I talk to you about the challenges you are facing in life and the challenges you're facing in your lives or your lives of your loved ones, When we talk about those things, I realize that those challenges are going to be overcome not by politicians in Washington, big surprise, but by neighbors and a community that chooses to practice loving God, loving neighbor, and loving themselves. That chooses to practice and relish the notion that we are indeed loved by God and challenged to become more. And when confronted with all of these things that we can't actually do anything about, all of these existential crises that they want to tell us over and over and over again are the most important things, we're going to look at it and go, I can't do everything, but I can do something, and the something I can do is love God, love neighbor, and love myself. That's who we are called to be, and I would much rather spend my time and my energy and my effort, and yes, invest my money in my neighbors in a place that is doing its best to live out our call to be God's kingdom. That is what I invite you to do. And the truth is, generosity is the spiritual gift that we are all called to play. Some of us have been given the spiritual gift of making money. Some of us have really dug in and done a really good job with Wesley's first rule to earn all you can. God bless you, we need you. We all get to be part of the give what we all you can as well, especially those of you who really succeeded at the first one. We have been gifted. John reminds us of the price that's already been paid, that the hardest work that we could ever do has already been done for us, that God did the hard thing, prepared a place for us. God loves us and shows his grace to us, pours out his Holy Spirit on us constantly, and will continue to do so no matter what we do. Our only choice, the only thing asked of us, is to see the grace and peace that has already been given and be grateful for it in all of the ways that God calls us to be grateful, including being generous. Amen.